is so much that we can do in our lives, right? And it's so easy to become distracted. So I think it's really important for us to assess the way we live, to more or less go through audits. Just as the business goes through audits, I think we need to audit our lives at times, and just to see actually what am I doing day by day, what am I achieving today, what am I planning to achieve in the next hour. What's good, my people? It's Godfrey here, currently on our Warrior for Christ channel, and today we will be discussing redeeming the time. This is an important topic. It really is. I guess time is more or less dealt with every single day. And I wrote this piece a couple of days ago actually, and it was a piece that I really resonated with, just because time could be wasted, and it could be wasted very quickly. And you know, many of us do know that the time that we spend is short. So I thought, you know, this really was convicting for me as I wrote this piece, just because I'm a fragile human being who constantly requires to renew his mind, and I can be distracted very, very quickly. So this piece was a blessing to me. It really worked for me, and I hope as we go through this blog you'll be helped by it. But I started with a thought-provoking question, which states: imagine if you were given a precise date, time and place marking the end of your life, how would you choose to live from this moment on? And it's an interesting fact, because I think when we even think of that particular question, it enables us to really think about how we should live our lives. Because, you know, some of you may be students, some of you may be employees as well, working, and we have deadlines, right? Whether that be in college, school, or in the workplace, normally there are deadlines, and when there are deadlines, it helps us to pursue towards that deadline and to be able to work as effective as possible as we can towards that deadline. And yeah, I guess with our lives, we don't know actually when we are going to die. And I think if we lived our lives like today is our last day, I think we would live differently. So hence why I started with that question. And I go straight into the fact that, you know, we have lost the value of time. We tend to waste a lot of time going through social media platforms, going through several different reels, going on, I guess you've got like TikTok now, you know, they're like 10 seconds, but you could go through 100 videos that are 10 seconds, the next minute you're there for a long time. So, you know, it's really, really interesting just to see how our thoughts are changing in terms of just the way we view things, even our attention span. It's more or less reducing day by day, because we are just so wired to watch videos that are so short, and now it's becoming very difficult at times to even be attentive for a long period. So the next couple of paragraphs I state we are constantly chasing experiences, and we are human beings that chase experience day by day, right? We are naturally wired as window shoppers. It's like we've become robots programmed to experience. This is interesting because there is so much that we can do in our lives, right? And it's so easy to become distracted. So I think it's really important for us to assess the way we live, to more or less go through audits. Just as the business goes through audits, I think we need to audit our lives at times, and just to see actually what am I doing day by day, what am I achieving today, what am I planning to achieve in the next hour, you know. And I think we can change the way we live in a positive sense. And then I more or less use the imagery of comparing to the birds that we hear in the morning to the way we live. It's so easy to just start the day with eyes are awake, you know, body is awake, and then next minute we just have our phones, right? And we're already flipping. We start the day by already flipping over on our phones, and that's dangerous, and we need to truly take our thoughts captive. That's what the scripture says, and to constantly be renewing our minds, and putting off and putting on the Spirit. So yeah, it's interesting to see how things can change so quickly. So I stated time should be precious to us, but we live in a world where our mouths run quicker than our minds. We are ready to start our day like birds singing in the morning. Yes, yes, yes to everything that fulfills our desires. And more or less, as individuals, we're just prone to just be comfortable. We want to be comfortable. We just want to feed our flesh and just do things that are just going to make us feel good, and most of the time, a lot of the time, it's not good for us. They're more or less weight. Even the author speaks about that in the book of Hebrews, where he actually distinguishes sin and weight. Certain things that we live, the way we live at times, sometimes it may not necessarily be sin, but it's slowing you down. It's weighty. If you go for a 100-meter sprint, you're not going to put weights on your legs. And I think that's the imagery. That's what the author is trying to emphasize in Hebrews. You've got Paul, similar in the book of Corinthians, where he states that all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. There are certain things in our Christian race that are not going to help you. It's not going to help you to run a good race. It's not going to help you to seek God's kingdom effectively. So we ought to be very, very careful. And in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 to 17, you've got Paul then talking about how we ought to utilize our time, because the days are evil. We lack discipline because we think we are missing out. It's not because we don't have time to read our Bible, to pray, to evangelize, or to serve. It is because we are wired selfishly to do what we want. It's our default position. Most of the time when we seek to entertain our souls, we choose the easiest option. The choice is often wasting time. And I think it's true. I think that is true. Sometimes the reason why we lack discipline is because we have too much time on our hands. There's too much to do. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons why we do lack discipline, is because there's just so much time on our hands. We don't know what to do with our time. And then I guess the fall, that's a really interesting topic. When I actually digged in through the scriptures just to see what the fall looks like, it gets really interesting. But Psalm 14:1 is a passage about the fall, because in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So we need to understand what a fall looks like, and we've got several passages that talks about the fall throughout the scriptures. So you've got Psalm 14:1 that states, the fool says in his heart, there is no God, they are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, there is none who does good. And in essence, what the psalmist is trying to say here is not trying to actually insult the individual intellectually. It's a moral charge, it's a moral indictment. So the individual who lives like a fool think that they are not accountable to anyone. They think that it is just themselves who are in control, and they can live their life however they want, but they don't know that at some point God is going to judge them. So it's a moral charge. And this is the atheist that says, there is no God. It's not because they don't believe God doesn't exist. It's because they want to eradicate God from their minds. They want to eradicate God from their equation so they can live how they want to live. They can live a sinful lifestyle. So it's a heart issue. It's not an intellectual issue. It's not because there's not enough evidence, as many atheists claim, that, which is again foolishness, because the Bible in Romans chapter 1, if I had to read through Romans chapter 1, Romans chapter 1 states the following. Let's go to Romans, and I believe it's from verse 18 onwards. So Romans chapter 1 verse 18 says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident. See, the scriptures always affirms. It doesn't give evidence for God. It affirms that God exists. So about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, both his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the likeness of corruptible man, and the birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. So we see in this passage that God has revealed himself. We see that through creation. We see his handiwork. So it's obvious to anyone that God exists, because we just have to look at creation. It follows logic, right? So the individual who lives their life like God doesn't exist is a fool, because you have been created in the image of God. You know right from wrong. So at some point and someday you will be judged on Judgment Day. But then at the same time, the believer as well can live their life as if God doesn't exist. And when you do live your life that way, it's foolish. If you're living a secret life of sin and you think you can shut your eyes like a kid who's playing hide and seek and says, no one can see me. Trust me, God sees absolutely everything. So it's really important for us to actually look at our lives and assess our lives and say, actually, am I living a secret life of sin? You've got Richard Dawkins, one of the famous atheists, states, nature is not cruel, only pitilessly indifferent. This is one of the hardest lessons for humans to learn. We cannot admit that things might be neither good nor evil, neither cruel nor kind, but simply callous, indifferent to all suffering, lacking all purpose. It's a self-refuting statement. He's making loads of absolutes. But, you know, this is more or less foolishness, really, because essentially an atheist, their worldview is consistent to Richard Dawkins' statement, right? If an atheist states that they're an atheist, they ought to live like evil doesn't exist. But they don't, because everybody has been created in the image of God. If someone decided to break into their house and try to kill them or try to steal their stuff, trust me, they're going to call the police. Why? Because they believe what they're doing is wrong, right? But as an atheist, if they're truly an atheist and somebody broke into their house, that individual who broke into their house, essentially, if he was an atheist as well, he's just doing what he thinks he's right. And the other atheist who believes he's doing is wrong, they're now just two protoplasm fishes on the earth arguing about things that are subjective in their worldview. But we don't live our lives that way. So we know that those who say God does not exist is foolish. Because when you say God doesn't exist, you're eradicating a moral lawgiver, which we know that more or less gives us the understanding of right and wrong. So as believers in Christ, we can actually live like the fool by ending up in the secret life of sin, thinking actually God does not see what I'm doing, but he does. He sees absolutely everything. So you've got several examples about the fool. You know, the fool believes he's always right. He constantly makes the same mistakes. He doesn't learn from them. He just constantly continue to do those things. We see as well the way of a fool. A wise man listens to advice, like a dog that returns to his vomit. It's a fool who repeats his folly. Very similar. So the fool constantly repeats his mistakes as well. And then the fool loves conflict. They just love to argue. They love to get into fights, whether that be online with their spouse, at home with their family, friends, whatever it is. A fool just loves to fight, loves to argue, just wants to get into controversy all the time. And at some point, as you can see, their mouth will invite a beating. It will get them into trouble. And then the fool is also lazy. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. It's actually quite laughable. He's mocking the lazy, right? He's saying, you're going to stand there, well, you're not going to get any food on your plate, so you might as well just eat yourself. Essentially, that's what Solomon is trying to say in the book of Ecclesiastes. So then there is a contrast. We need to know exactly what it means to live life and to utilize your time wisely. And we begin with God himself. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In order for us to live a life that's going to be God honoring, we ought to start with God. So in Ephesians chapter 5, going back to Ephesians chapter 5, Paul elaborates on Christian living and how we ought to live, and to make the best use of time because the days are evil. And this actually parallel to Colossians chapter 4, I believe, verse 5. 4 verse 5, which states, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. And essentially what it is that the longer we live, the more resistance there's going to be towards the gospel. So we ought to be able to create opportunities as much as possible as believers to witness as well. The will of the Lord. Christians are also called to understand what the will of the Lord is. And the only way we can be doing that is to be filled by the Spirit. Because that's when our hearts start to align with his will. And then we ought to be thankful. You have to be thankful for everything that God does for us. God continues to bless us. God continues to love us and to use us as his vessels. So I summarize it towards the end, and we ought to pray for wisdom, be discerning, seek opportunities for gospel witness, and just to limit time wasting habits as much as we can. But I hope you were helped by this blog, and hope to see you soon. Take care.